our next guest or speaker, she has worked as a victim advocate and a community engagement specialist. And she's also a substantive areas. She works at substantive areas such as violence against women and critical community engagement. She is currently a professor of criminal justice or criminology and the director of African American Studies program at Ball State University, where she also serves as an affiliate faculty member in the Gender and Women Studies program. She's also an adjunct professor for Garland University in Belize. Let's put our hands together and welcome beautifully our next guest all the way from USA, Ball State University, Dr. Keisha Warren Gordon. Thank you very much for that. Warmly welcome. Thank you.
Wow. If only I could get a room this full at home in Muncie, and only if I could get that kind of welcome every day that I went to go give a presentation. You all really know how to make someone feel welcome. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So before I get started, I want to do something. So there's a guy standing up there in the corner, and he and I have been married for 19 years. And this is only the second time in our marriage that he's been able. I do. Often work lives and our children and our other responsibilities don't align up for us to be able to share these types of things. So I'm gonna show off today. In America, that means I'm gonna do an extra good job because he's watching. And he took a week off from work to come and do this with me. So I am very thankful to him for doing that. So. The last time I was in Ghana, I was here with my then 15-year-old daughter. And we were in Ho, and same thing. And so it's an honor to be back. It's an honor to be back and to be able to do this again with him and with you all. So first of all, I have to thank AFS for inviting me, all the dignitaries in the room, all of the university officials and professors, and you students. So thank you all for indulging me. So I want to talk. We're gonna get past the scenarios because Madame who came before me, she just everything she talked about, it was check, 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 check. So I'm gonna just kind of get into some of the other things. I want to talk about some of the. Before I get into this, let me tell you a little bit more about my background. So I first got out of college and I worked as a victim advocate. And that is someone who does a lot of what you all were describing. I work with the police department to assist women and children who have been victims of violence and helping to get them their needs, helping to ensure that they were safe, those sorts of things. And then from there, I went back to graduate school and I started studying violence against women from an academic perspective. And the more I studied from an academic perspective, I started traveling and working with organizations like Femistar, FSA, and other organizations to say, okay, what are the commonalities in how you all support women? Here, how do we support women who look like us in the United States, and how do we do it in other parts of the world? So that work has taken me to Botswana, to Belize, here, and to Ethiopia. So I've been blessed to have that opportunity to do that. So that's the lens that I'm coming from. But I'm also coming from a wife, and I'm also coming from a mother of 3 children. I have 2 boys and a girl. My girl was here with me the last time. She's 18 years old, and she's a freshman in college. As I talk about intimate partner violence, as I talk about domestic violence, I'm not just talking about it from a professorship point of view. Please know that I'm talking about it from a wife. I'm talking about it from a mom, because I don't want my children to be perpetrators or to be victims. And I'm also talking about it from a community engaged perspective, in the sense that I want to work with and for communities. So that's where we are. So when we talk about intimate partner violence, I want to lead off talking about the mental and the physical parts that sometimes we don't talk about. And one of the areas that I want to talk about is how, and I'm using the term intimate partner violence. We can use domestic violence. We can interchange those terms because they're the same thing. The big difference for me is that when we talk about domestic violence, we're usually talking about people who are in marital relationships that are in the same household, whereas we talk about intimate violence, it's a broader definition. But today, it's all violence, right? So we're not going to get hung up on the definitions. So at any rate, so when we talk about intimate partner violence, we also have to talk about not just the physical element, that physical thing we see, that bruising, that broken eye socket. We also have to talk about these other things that we don't see, which is the HIV, the STDs, the STI, sexually transmitted infections, and how those are also used as a form of violence. Some of my work in the United States and in Botswana suggests that people will often know that they have a virus or that they have an infection, and they will still have intercourse with a person knowing that they have that infection as a way of controlling that person. So when we talk about these acts, we're not just talking about, as Madame said prior to me, we're not just talking about the physical manifestation of a bruise or something like that. We're also talking about these other manifestations. Also, another thing that we know is that studies suggest that women who are in these types of relationships are more likely to suffer from depression, okay? They're more likely to suffer from suicidal behaviors or suicidal thoughts. In the United States right now, the largest number of people who are attempting suicide on a daily basis are Black women, okay? And that number is rising, and we are looking at this as possibly one of the contributors. Not the only contributor to that number going up, but possibly one of the contributors. We're starting to examine that. Also, if I just put this down, can you guys hear me? Okay, can I use my mom voice? No, don't. Okay, I'll keep it. Okay. I was going to use my mom voice, but I'll keep it. We also know that, as Madame said, that mental, physical, and sexual reproduction health is affected by intimate partner violence. So what do we see? Controlling how often you have children, or whether or not you do have children. That is part of this. Other things that we have to talk about are as well as the indirect impacts of intimate partner violence on a body. So we know that hypertension, what's another word for hypertension? High blood pressure. High blood pressure leads to what? Strokes, heart attacks, those types of things. Well, the stress from being a victim of intimate partner violence can lead to hypertension. We know that. But we don't see that, right? You know, we don't walk around with a big red whatever on our chest because now we have hypertension because of the abuse that we've had to deal with. We don't see it that way. But we do know that there's a relationship there. We know that there's a relationship between cancer, some cancers, and being in an intimate partner abusive relationship. Some of those cancers come from having STIs that go untreated. Other cancers come from a lack of being able to get preventative medical health care and issues stem on for years and years and years because you never got that treated. Again, we don't have a shirt that says this is that, but we know that there's a direct link there. So let's go on to, well, and this too. Women who are victims of domestic violence are more likely than others, they're at a higher risk than others, to develop addictions to alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. Now, that does not mean that that's automatically going to happen to you. That's not what it means. But it means that you have a greater likelihood of taking on those unhealthy habits if you are a victim. Why is that? Because these are seen as stress copers. And so people fall into line and, oh, I'm going to have a cigarette to relax because he hit me last night, so I need a cigarette. Well, the next thing you know, you have an addiction. Or I'm going to have just one glass of whatever. And that one glass leads to 2 glasses, leads to 3. And that's how you cope. So that's how we see that. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we also need to talk about is the untold story of the economic impact that intimate partner violence has on people. Now, according to the World Health Organization, so I didn't come up with these numbers came from the WHO. Because of intimate partner violence, we lose a total of 8.0 million work days a year. So if you think of the people that you know have been the victims of intimate partner violence, how many days have they had to take off work because they didn't want to go to work with a black eye, or they couldn't go to work because physically they just could not make it? That plays into this, okay? The cost of intimate partner violence exceeds $8.3 billion per year, and that's in health care, that's in the lack of work, people contributing to the workforce, and in other aspects of supporting. Between 21 and 60% of victims of intimate partner violence will lose a job due to reasons stemming from the abuse. Now, we're not, and let's be clear on this, we're not just talking about, oh, I couldn't go to work today because I was abused. We're also talking about, I can't go to work today because he said I can't go to work, okay? We're also talking about, I can't go to work today because I'm at my mom's house because I've left him, and if I show up to work, he's going to show up there. So when we're talking about people not contributing to the workforce, it's not just because of the physical manifestation of the abuse, it's also because of the threat. This statistic came from America. I tried to not throw any American statistics in here because that's not good to do when you're in another country. But I didn't have any statistics for Ghana, unfortunately. But between 2003 and 2008, 142 women were murdered in their workplace by their abusers. 78% of the women in the workplace were killed during that time frame. So again, that's a U.S. statistic. I don't marry it. Don't say that it's a reflection of Ghana, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm just giving you a framework. Next slide, please. So let's talk about who abusers are. And before we get into this, let me tell you 2 things. Students, do not leave here and say, oh, this check sheet means that you're an abuser because you fit all the attributes of this check sheet. Don't go tell anybody that. And also, this is not an all-encompassing list, okay? These are some of the characteristics that some abusers have that we know after years of studying this topic. So let's go through these really quickly. Alcohol use. As one of the threads that I can say that I've explored and I've noted, whether I'm here, whether I'm in Botswana, whether I'm in Belize or the United States, is that alcohol and drug use does tend to come up. Not in every case, but it does. So alcohol abuse. What's next? Raised in a violent household. So thinking about this whole notion of socialization. Have anybody ever heard that term before, socialization? Yeah, so socialization is the idea that we pick up on things based off of what we see and what we hear, okay? So if in my household, if my husband is yelling at me all the time, now I typically can use him as an example and be very comfortable with it, but given that he's upstairs probably listening, I'm going to be very loose with this example. But say that he hits me all the time and our 10-year-old son observes that. What is he going to think? Is he going to think that it's okay to hit women? What if my husband is calling me bad names or names that don't truly represent who I see myself as being? What is my son going to do? What about my 18-year-old daughter? If she grows up hearing her father talk to me in a manner that's not appropriate, what is she going to think in terms of how men can talk to her? So when we look at these characteristics and we say, oh yes, that was one of the things that we commonly see. In my work in Belize, one of the things that I've noticed is it's not just the perpetrators who grew up in violent households, it's also the victims. Because often victims are socialized into that behavior is okay. So they move from mom and dad's house where they were victimized into the partner's home where he's a predator too. That's the only word I can think of. So we can think of that. Low self-esteem, we all know what that is. Jealousy, poor communication. Now often we see low self-esteem and jealousy surrounding workforce issues and family issues. So you have a female who maybe she is starting to move up in her job. Maybe she's starting to, her shop is starting to really take on some financial independence. That financial independence can be somewhat intimidating for a partner who was not socialized to see women as equals. So if you grew up in a household where women are supposed to be a certain way, and all of a sudden this spouse or this partner has taken on, hey, she makes enough that she can pay for this now, or she makes enough where she can pay for that, that can be an issue. Again, that's low self-esteem, jealousy, poor communication. That is always an issue. So, and I'm just going to leave that one there. Because that's a whole nother lecture. And then stress. Not having the coping skills to deal with stress, not understanding how stress impacts our mental health and our physical health. How many of you are starting to hear that word trauma? Do we hear that word a lot here, that this is trauma informed, so that's what we're talking about here. How does someone who's had to deal with some aspect of trauma, how did they learn how to cope with that as a young person, and now what does that look like as an adult? And then just having a poor attitude towards women. I've engaged with men who've clearly said to me, you know, women have no voice. I was in another country, I won't tell you what country, and my daughter was with me, because it wasn't here. And my daughter was with me, and we were at a table, and we were at a dinner table, and she was speaking at the table, and the gentleman said, oh, you talk a lot. He said that to her, you talk a lot. And really what he was saying is, one, why is this girl child at the table with all of these adults? And two, really he socialized her to speak and not, just be seen and not heard. And okay, but to me, that represented a poor attitude towards girl children and poor attitudes towards women. Because if he has that attitude towards a girl, what attitude would he have towards a woman? People who see that violence is appropriate. There are some people who who feel like corporal punishment and physical discipline is appropriate in a relationship, in a mutually communicative relationship. So that's what they want. Now let's look at victims real quick. Low self-esteem, let's keep going, withdrawal, lack of trust, fear, self-blaming, and frustration. And these are all that were covered before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time in these. But I want to talk a little bit about self-blame, because the idea of self-blame is that I did something wrong to cause this person to treat me this way. I did something wrong to cause this man to beat me. I did something wrong to cause my father to come into my room at night and do things to me that shouldn't be done in my childhood. And so when we think about girls who have been abused, they will say, if I hadn't worn this, or if I hadn't have gone there, and if I hadn't have, you know, a good example was I was working with a victim once, and every night she was charged with making a bath, drawing a bath for her husband, and having a glass in the freezer. And the glass had to be frozen so that when he walked in the door, his drink could be poured in the glass and the drink would get cold. And one night she didn't do that, or she did it and it wasn't right. And he ended up pulling out all of the back of her hair. She had no hair. When we got on the scene, all of her hair in the back was gone. And when we said what happened, everything was, I didn't do. I didn't do. It was never he shouldn't have. It was all, if I hadn't put the bath water warm enough, if I hadn't, I was running late, so I didn't get the glass cold enough in the freezer. And so that's self-blame. That's her taking responsibility for his actions. And we never want to do that, and we never want to foster that, and we never want to make that okay, because that is never okay. It's never okay for someone to hit you. Okay, let's keep going. So this is what I really came here for, because this is what I want to introduce to you all. Has anyone ever seen this? Anyone in here? Okay, so this is what's called the power and control wheel. Now, everything in this wheel, we've already talked about. Either I've talked about it or Madame has talked about it. So none of this is new. It's a new way of understanding what we're talking about here. So this is the idea. So when we think about physical abuse, we often talk about it in that one occasion, or that second occasion, or that third occasion, right? We talk about it in that instance. He hit me on the third day of the fourth day of the 5th hour of 2020. Okay, that's when he hit me. But what we don't talk about is what were all the shenanigans that he was doing before that. And so this wheel, and I did not develop this, okay, this was developed by a victim advocate by the name of Eleanor Walker in the 1980s, before any of you all were born, I know. And what this does is, it allows for us to see through the wheel, the spokes of the wheel, how there are elements of abuse that are ongoing, and the physical abuse is just, and the sexual abuse is just one part of that manifestation. So if we're thinking about isolation, for example, and that being a form of abuse, how many times has the partner told the other partner that she couldn't leave the house? Okay, that's part of this abuse. That we would call that emotional abuse or psychological abuse, but often what happens is we don't recognize that as abuse because we are so caught up in the physical manifestation of the actual abuse. But in the reality, you're probably, not you, but victims are probably abused more in these other spokes than they are the actual physical manifestation. So we have using male privilege, making all the decisions. You know, how often does that happen? You know, where you know, well, I decided we're not going to do that. And it's one thing for us to communicate and say that that's, okay, thanks. I was here, male privilege. It's one thing for us to sit down together and say, yes, you are the head of my household. As the head of the household, you can make these types of decisions that will go along with that. That's in my house. We have that. So I'm not anti that. What I am anti and what I am suggesting is that when there is I'm the master and you have to do what I tell you to do, that's when it becomes problematic. Using the children. So I hear this a lot. This is universal, whether I'm in Belize, Botswana, here, or the United States. I hear about the children. How does the partner control what is done and what is said to and about the children? Does he control where the children can go? Okay, the children can't go to your mother's house. They can only go to my sister's house. Or listen to this. If you leave me, what's going to happen to the children? How often do we hear that? Do we think about that? Or if the children, if you leave, this would be bad for the children. Don't leave because it's harmful for the children. All of that is a continuation of abuse. It's just we don't look at it like that. Then we have economic abuse. We've talked about that a little bit. Intimidation. This is one that people tend to recognize, but again, do they really frame it as an ongoing continuation of abuse? Slamming doors, throwing books around, slamming coats around, that sort of thing. And the idea is we justify that, oh, he had a bad day. Oh, he's upset about this. Oh, he's stressed about that. But the reality is he's being abusive. I gotcha. So I'm going to move to this last point. Oh, and let me just say this too. When this power and control wheel was developed in the 80s, it was developed thinking about women as victims. Okay, but we can look at this and see how women also can use this to control men. So I don't want us to think that this is just about the male being the perpetrator. So this is called the honeymoon phase or the red rose phase. And this is essentially the phases of an abusive relationship. So we start off with this stress, frustration, low self-esteem, and poor communication. So again, those are all abuse. That's all abuse. But we tend not to recognize it as abuse. So we start off with this stuff going on, and this could last for weeks. This could last for years. It could last for days. Then we get to the explosion. Okay, that's when the actual abuse happens. That's when he's hitting. That's when he's hurting you. That's the physical. This is fight, anger, and fear. So those are the three responses that you have. Okay? Then from phase 2 to phase 3 is usually somewhat immediate. It could be in hours, it could be days, but it's definitely shorter than any of these other phases, and that's the honeymoon phase. So guess what happens there? And that's what we call it, either the honeymoon phase or the rose phase. Usually between the honeymoon phase and getting back to phase 1, that can be an extended period of time too. That could be years. That could be years, or it could be weeks, or it could be months. But that could be an extended period of time as well. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me.